Well, let's just begin our conversation this evening. Let me introduce my panel to you. I've got China NC, the spokesperson of the BJP, Khushbu Sundar, spokesperson of the Congress, Santosh Desai, author and columnist, and Lawrence, Ian Lawrence, member, African Students Association. Thanks all so much for coming in to speak to us today. China, let me start by asking you what Mr. Tarun Vijay has said. He has, of course, apologized profusely. I know that. But just it's going back to the comment. It's deeply problematic at many levels. One, of course, obvious, the fact that South Indians are black, we live with blacks, and that's proof that we aren't racist. So to deny racism, we again come up with a very offensive racist comment. Second, inability of people, especially in the north, to distinguish between South Indians. That they could be from different parts of South India. There are several differences, but not really to see it as often described. You know, we see up north, we see all of them as just Madrasis, and also patronizing about mingling with blacks. Shaina, how would you really be able to justify any of this?
Yes. Let me please say at the outset that Mr. Tarun Vijay has not just apologized profusely, he has also explained the reference to context. Now, in a country as diverse as India, where you have people who have different choices of language, belief, food, living, different even physical appearances, I think we need to understand that racism, if we would have had so many cases that would come to light. The fact that we accept everyone is unity and diversity. Now, I think if you hear his entire interview and what he was trying to achieve, it was the larger point that in a country like India, where we could have had certain cases, that does not happen because we believe that we can coexist with differences.
Right. There are, of course,
Shaina,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
The choice of words should have probably been different.
Right.
So I don't think that we need to discuss.
No, we're not. We're just taking his comment because there are many. He has apologized. He has even apologized profusely. I agree with what you're saying there. But the focus, of course, in recent weeks, China, you would agree, has been on how our attitudes and our superiority complex when it comes to looking at people who are darker skinned than us, especially this happens, I believe, more in the north. There are many this evening, China, who are saying that they feel deeply insulted.
Insulted is one thing which I completely concede and I empathize towards, but I think the larger point, Ankita, if you really want to debate, is how do we do away with stereotypical norms? Why do we judge somebody who comes from the northeast, or why do we have a certain consciousness of skin coloring in our country? We need to debate on that too. And
Absolutely.
It's most unfortunate.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, let's understand that India coexists with different cultures, different thought processes, different physical appearances, and all of us need to give it to this great motherland of ours that this is probably the only country in the world
we just need to sort of
violent hate crimes or racial discrimination on a daily basis.
Okay, we just perhaps need to sort of show more proof of that with our actions beyond just words. But Khushbu Sundar, we also heard Ellen Govan there say in response to this that perhaps Mr. Vijay doesn't really know the fact that there are several fair-skinned people in the south. He went on to give Jayalalitha's example there again, and he would say a proof that no matter which part of the country that you come from, we're not really comfortable in our own skin.
Ankita, you're very low. Suddenly you went off, but then whatever I heard, the question, it's very shocking to see that somebody of Mr. Tarun Vijay's caliber is speaking in such a language. We definitely coexist, and I would like to remind Shaina that people are not reminded about the differences. They coexist, they live together. But then when people like Tarun Vijay make such statements, you do bring it into a fact that you remind them that you are different from one and each other. You don't belong to the same community. You don't belong to the same area. You don't belong to the same color box what we are talking about. So when people like Tarun Vijay, on whatever context they speak of, when they bring in this differentiation, when they bring in this vast difference between the two, that you're a black and you're a white, then that's when the problem starts, because we do coexist and we all believe. I would have really appreciated if Tarun Vijay would have said that we all Indians, we believe in diversity and we all live under one, on one motherland. It's like one huge roof we have of India, and we all live like a family under one roof.
The differences.
But then Mr. Tarun Vijay very specifically said that if there was no racism, and if there was racism, we wouldn't coexist with the South Indians. So that is something which is very hurtful, and that is not acceptable. Though he has apologized, it's definitely not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. Well, Santosh Desai, come in here. There's, of course, everyday racism. This might be one comment we've seen an apology there from Tarun Vijay, but there's everyday racism in our lives. We know about matrimonial ads and our demands really for fair girls, for fair brides. We've seen women with dusky complexions, especially in, say, cinema, in the ad world, and narrate their experiences. Each time there's a model who's perhaps darker skinned than the others, the challenges that she has to go through. So this is something that we've almost learned to accept about ourselves, yet we scream hoarse saying we are not a racist country. Why are we in denial?
Well, I guess, because it's a difficult thing to accept. I mean, the fact is that we've always seen ourselves as victims of racism, and now when we are suddenly confronted with the very strong possibility that it's we who share that prejudice as much as being the victims of it, it's a very difficult thing to accept. I think what Tarun Vijay's comment, I think I find it significant in the sense that he was actually trying to make the case that we are not racist, and what he said was in an attempt to defend India and Indians against the charge of racism, and in doing so he reveals this unconscious bias where so I find it interesting. Two things I find interesting: the fact that it was that this implicit bias. The other is his use of the we, where he says that we live with people who are of a different skin color. Who's the we he's talking about? So the implicit association of India with that part of India which is, which in his mind is fair skin.
Absolutely. Shaina, come in there. There are, of course, all those who have sort of brought up that point. Who is we? Is it basically the North Indian and how he looks at the South? Again, not restricting yourself to just Mr. Vijay's comments, but like you said, just all that is ingrained and intrinsic really to who we are.
I just want to make one point, Ankita, very, very clear.
Natasha, but go ahead.
In a country as large as ours, where you have many mindsets. Sorry, Natasha.
No problem.
Sorry, I cannot see, so I thought from the voice.
Carry on.
Natasha, in a country as large as ours, where we have so many different pockets who have a different mindset from each other, despite that, Mr. Vijay's point was there are hardly ever any cases of racism, and if at all, we should be unanimously, univocally condemning it. However, there is a fact that in India, when a kid is born or a child is born, isn't it the sasu says ki gora if they're looking for a bride, gori ladki chahiye. And shouldn't we be discussing that too?
Absolutely.
That if you have this color bias, why is it? And if it does exist, it needs to be condemned.
Fair enough. That in fact was my question, that this fair and lovely culture
he was
that we have perpetuated.
In reference to context.
Yes, absolutely. This fair and lovely culture that we've perpetuated. But even as we sort of say
that,
are we
obsession.
Are we absolutely?
That's an
are we
obsession,
racist?
and despite that,
absolutely.